Welcome to day 9 of our Advent Devotional series. Today's reading is John 1 and the second part of verse 14. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Well, I wonder what comes to your mind when I say marmalade brownies. You see, in my mind, they're just two things that don't naturally fit together. You've got bitter marmalade and you've got sweet chocolate, and how they come together to form one delicious brownie, I don't know. But I'm told that they do, and many people have written their recipes for marmalade brownies. But in our passage today, I think we've got something which on the surface of things is very similar to that. We saw yesterday, didn't we, that Jesus, he is the Word become flesh. He's God come down to us. And John, he cries out, doesn't he? He says, we've seen him. We've actually seen him with our own eyes, the Son of God. And John continues, and he says in our passage today, he came from the Father full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. Now, in my mind, and I think most of our culture's mind, grace and truth, it's a bit like marmalade and chocolate. They're two things that we can't often see fitting together. If we're going to be full of grace and full of kindness towards someone, we might think that we can't share the blunt truth. And we have to water it down and caveat it until it's morphed into something that, well, eventually becomes further and further away from what we wanted to say in the first place. But then, if we're honest and truthful about things and we're direct in that way, then often people wonder where all the love's gone, where all the grace and the kindness is when we say things like that. It's unloving, maybe, people would say, to say the things like that. And we know people, don't we, that fall into either of these categories. And so often when we try and get a balance of these things, when we're saying things, we lose sight of both. But here's what's incredible about what John says about Jesus. John says that Jesus, he came from the Father full of grace and truth, full of them both. In other words, when we look at Jesus, we see someone who didn't have to make the compromise between speaking the truth or showing grace. Everything Jesus did was full of grace and truth. In fact, when we read through John's Gospel, that's exactly what we see time and time again. In fact, a few chapters on, in John chapter 4, Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman who's drawing water from the well. And Jesus, in this encounter, he shares with this woman everything about her, everything he knows about her and her life, everything that she's ever done, everything that has brought her shame and brings guilt to her. And after that encounter, we see in the story that she runs into the town and she proclaims to everyone, she says, "Come see a man who told me everything that I've ever done." She met a man who was full of truth. Someone who told her everything that she'd ever done. And yet she also encountered someone who was so full of grace, someone who loved her enough to meet her at that well. And what's wonderful is that if we read through that encounter, we see that Jesus offered her and didn't just share with her everything that she'd ever done, but everything that she could find in knowing him, that she could know life in choosing to follow and trust in who he was. You see, we, like this woman, we need to hear the truth. It's so important, isn't it? We don't need someone who's going to come and water down the truth, who's going to come and caveat things. We don't need someone who just gives us the things that we want to hear. We need someone who tells us what we desperately need to hear. And yet to leave us with just the truth, well, it would crush us, wouldn't it? Just like this woman. And yet, as we've seen, Jesus, he's full of truth and he's full of grace. And even though Jesus is someone who can tell us today everything that we've ever done, thought or said, he stands ready today, just like he was with that Samaritan woman by the well. He stands ready to encounter us and to show us truth and grace, that we might know the forgiveness and the love of God and relationship with God, the one who has made us. Because Jesus, he came from the Father full of grace and truth.